Welcome to the Manhattan Project. This is day 22.
Last night we stayed in to watch a new Amazon Prime Video release, What the Fuck, otherwise known as WTF. Take a look at us watching.
What the fuck are we looking at, John?
Well, if you're already watching this video review, then you know what movie it is. But we're sitting here on Amazon Direct Video watching it for free with Amazon Prime Direct Video Prime. And I'm tired.
So WTF is a new low-budge, low-key slasher flick by the director Peter Herro. It was put out by Midnight Releasing, and it's on Amazon Video Direct right now, as well as other streaming platforms. There's a good chance you've never heard of it. That's because it's not really getting marketed like a major release. This is the first time on this channel we reviewed something this small, and yet I think it's a good thing to look at movies like this. There's always some really interesting stuff when you're playing in this small of a field. You get to experiment a lot. There's no studio overhead. And so I definitely look forward to the Manhattan Project reviewing more movies like this. So what is WTF about? Well, it's a girl who... It's basically Scream 2 if Scream 2 came first. So it's a girl years after she survived an awful massacre where a lot of her friends died. She now has decided to go to spring break to sort of face her fears. And sure enough, there is another killing spree that occurs. Take a look at the trailer.
I need to conquer my fear. I think that this will be a good first step.
You folks ought to take heed. I wouldn't go there if I were you.
Rachel, we need to know everything that happened that night.
We drove into the middle of nowhere. And that's where it all started.
Who's there?
So Mr. Evan, what were your expectations going into WTF exclamation point?
I was a little unsure based on the trailer on the exact tone of the movie. It seemed to have a strong sense of humor sometimes, other times not be as self-aware. But in general, I really like horror. I really did like the concept. So overall, I was pretty excited to see what they would do with it.
Here's my take. WTF is a fun play on the genre tropes that actually takes really good advantage of its budget to pull off some interesting technical spectacle while ultimately not really getting to be able to get past its super vapid, shallow female characters. Agree or disagree?
I agree. I think that we both agree that WTF starts pretty strong and that the interactions between the characters, it's a good sort of like ensemble mix there. And it's more that because the movie is a little bit more tongue-in-cheek, that it creates shallow characters, like you said, who it's a bit harder to be invested in when it gets bloodier.
Yeah, and I think another thing we both agreed about the first half of this movie that made sort of the best part of it is that it introduces a framing device, which is actually something that we see pretty rarely in just a straight slasher film. This movie is kind of a straight slasher film. It's a little bit self-aware, there's a lot of humor in it, and yet so are all the Friday the 13th movies, so it's not like it's going too far out of what the slasher genre has historically been, which is cool, and yet it introduces this device where the main character, who's the survivor, the final girl of the group, is telling these police interrogating or FBI interrogating folks in one of those like dark interrogation rooms exactly what happened. So she's starting from the beginning, and it's through her narration that we get the framing of this movie. So that's why you can tell that there's sometimes a biased perspective when you're seeing events, because she's telling the story, and that plays into it. And there are scenes that there's not really that many scenes that you don't see because she wasn't there. Actually, there are, because it does a really good job of pulling the twist off of, I'm not going to spoil it, but that was smart. That's something I haven't really seen in a slasher film, and I enjoyed that. And they set it up in a way that doesn't knock you over the head, where, she comes up, you're like, okay, why are they talking about two massacres? And then it cuts to the beginning, and then eventually it cuts back to her, and she says, okay, and this is when we showed up at the whatever, and then we cut back, and then that keeps you in line with what's going on. That was just a really wordy way of saying I enjoyed the fact that they had an interesting framing device to make this a not completely linear narrative, something that so easily could have and usually is just a straight slasher movie about a bunch of kids going to the woods and then getting killed.
Were there any things that stuck out to you in the movie because it's not like a major release that they could get away with or just choose to include in at this budget, like the freedom afforded to them?
Not really. I mean, there's more gratuitous nudity than your average slasher movie. That feels more 80s than it does 2017, which is probably why, because this movie is straight to VOD. I don't personally think that it's trying to be like completely subversive or against the grain of the normal slasher trope, and it's not trying to be like experimental because of its small budget. I think they're just taking that small budget, trying their best to make a good original slasher film, and that was the goal here. But I mean, if you saw something different,
It's just a small thing, but earlier on in the movie they say face fuck, and I was like, that's like one of those little things like you don't hear in movies normally.
More gratuitous, vile.
On the whole, I don't think it was, but every now and then you have moments like that where it's just like, oh yeah, you have the odd word or the odd image that you can get away with. So, which is interesting to see that within a movie that, like you said, is for the most part purposefully within a normal slasher like level as far as the nudity and the violence and the tone and stuff.
One other thing I really liked about this movie is this one actor. I'll throw his face up right now, but he plays like the typical stoner character, and just a lot of his humor just lands pretty well. It's very well performed. He's relatable. There's some funny lines. I found him to be by far the best performer of all these sort of no-name actors and actresses. Usually when you see a movie like this where it's just like a lot of gore, no one you recognize, a lot of nudity, whatever, it's like, okay, well, we're going to see some porn-level acting, some awful shit. And this dude, not bad at all. I really could see him being in bigger projects in the future. Agreed?
Agreed. He's solid. Also, we don't want to spoil what the twist is, although most of the marketing would lead you to believe that there will be a twist, so I think we can say there's a twist, as a lot of slasher movies have twists. And I think they did a pretty good job as far as like setting up the seeds of the twist early on in the movie. There was a point a few minutes before it happened that I figured it out, and it's not because I have some crazy Sherlock Holmes intellect or some bullshit like that, just I noticed that they had good clues in there, and I was like, oh wow, that adds up to that and that. So it makes it satisfying.
I figured out who the killer was, like, I don't know, 8 minutes into this movie.
No, but
you didn't disagree.
The other element
there is another
of the
twist.
twist.
No
Yeah.
doubt. That is true.
What you figured out, I think, is fairly predictable, and I'm praising them for going a step beyond that.
Right.
So.
Yeah, no doubt. But if we are going to go into criticism of this movie, because no movie is without criticisms, and this one certainly has issues. A lot of weird homophobic humor, just a lot of it. Just like so many, like, this character's gay, and that's the joke, or they're going to say they're gay, or whatever. The females are just kind of shitty people in general. Like, they're very vapid, unlikable, and not really written like real human beings. They're just supposed to be annoying. And the guys are kind of douchey, too. At least you get a little bit more humanity in them, or at least you get to hear them talk about things a little bit more. And the kills are not really interesting, original, scary, well done with the makeup effects or anything like that. So as far as just like a straight horror film, this movie's a lot more watchable when you're just watching the kids and being invested in how they're dealing with the framing device and the story. It doesn't really get you with the gore or the scares, in my opinion.
Yeah, I feel like the movie was going more for shock value with certain deaths, and then with the deaths that weren't necessarily constructed for shock value, then there was even less there to grab onto, which is unfortunate.
So yeah, overall, What the Fuck does some pretty interesting things in the low budget horror thriller genre. I love some drone footage they had in there, and it's really competently made for what I assume is like a shoestring budget. So I'd say if you're into this stuff, you're into these like straight to DVD gore, slasher, like trauma exploitation, any of those type of classic subgenres of the genre of horror that are not mainstream, and this is definitely worth a look. It's got some horror icons cameoing in there, kind of. Well, it's got Perez Hilton and Shawn Philips from YouTube. Anyhow, that if it's that, it's worth a look for you. If you're not a fan of the genre of horror, or you're not into low budget movies, then avoid this one. It's not going to convert you.
This movie is like a temporary tattoo. It's not as cool as a real tattoo, but still pretty cool.
A for effort.
A for effort.
Is that like a 1.5 out of 4?
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for watching. What are we?
We're the Manhattan Project.
What do we do?
We review a new movie every single day.
How often do we do it?
Every single day. Which means that we're going to be back tomorrow.
And the next day.
And the next day. And the next